Welcome to the Made for Agriculture podcast. Today's host is Adam Jones.
All right, folks, welcome to another episode of the Made for Agriculture podcast. My name is Adam Jones. Super interesting topic today, guys. I appreciate you taking time to listen in. Kind of have a couple of old hats, if you will, for podcast guests today. But I think rather than just kind of being a super external or super dig in the weeds, hardcore agronomy type topic, this one's a little more outside the box, if you will. And so I feel like actually these are the two perfect guests I have on with me today to discuss that. We're going to dive into the AI and agriculture world. You can't do a Google search these days without getting an AI generated response. And how does that apply to the ag industry? How are we utilizing it in the ag industry? What does it kind of spell for the future of the ag industry? And specifically the agronomy world, right? So I think those are all good questions. I don't know that we have firm answers, but we've definitely got discussion. So appreciate you again jumping on and tuning in today. So with us today, we got Shannon McClintock, our regional agronomist from Southwest Missouri, Southeast Kansas. Shannon, how are we doing today?
Good. Thanks, Adam.
Yep, and also our resident AI expert, we're going to call him Scott Wilbur, our regional agronomist from Central Missouri, I believe coming to us from Mexico today. How are we doing, Scott?
Doing well, thank you.
Well, I mentioned, gentlemen, that, like I said, if I do a Google search for a birthday gift for my daughter that's coming up this week, I get an AI generated answer, right? When we just mentioned a few minutes ago, as soon as I hit the record button on working on this podcast, AI automatically started generating a transcript of everything that we say. It asked me what language we would be speaking in today, so it would make sure to get the transcript correct and would formulate that into notes and an outline for us if I asked it to. So the reality is artificial intelligence is however you want to call it, is already here, and we're already utilizing it to some extent. Obviously, that's more recent. Somewhat of a more recent development. I mean, I guess I always tend to start with history or talking about how we've used things in the past. Is there really any history to discuss, gentlemen, or are we basically talking things that have happened in the last 6 months? Scott, what do you think?
Well, first of all, did you say that it asked you what language we were going to be speaking in?
It absolutely did. Yep.
That seems like it would have figured that out.
Yep. And there's possibly is a glimpse into the future of our conversation right there.
Yeah. If you follow any of this stuff, there's been kind of starts and stops for, I don't know, 30, 40 years probably. I think a lot of what has probably changed recently is technology and chips and just computing speed and the whole shooting match from.
I was just going to say processing speed, right?
Yeah.
You can put AI generators into the most basic of smart technology now, where we just didn't have that option, prior to more recently here, or the internet bandwidth either, obviously, right? I mean, even if we had the processing speed from a device standpoint, we didn't have the widely accessible internet speed to be able to support generation.
Yeah. One of the interest that's out there. Just you can see this by how many have popped up all at once. It's not like everybody's, jumping into a couple of camps. There's, you can rattle 10 of them off pretty easy.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
The open AI seem to be the one that are taking off, like the Chat GPTs, the Gronks, the different ones like that out there. When you think about Windows, Microsoft Windows, the little paperclip back, in the early 2000s, that essentially was AI. Predictive text is a way of AI. Those are more closed forms. I believe it's closed firewall, so it's like in a controlled system. That's been around for 20, 30 years. It's this new open world stuff that's taking data live off the internet and doing whatever you ask it to do with the data. It's crazy.
Yep. And to keep our all of our listeners from driving themselves crazy trying to think of the name of the little paperclip. I believe Clippy was his name. Is that correct? So
Yeah.
for all of you, well,
One
I'm
of the
millennial.
first
I don't know what. Yeah, all of you.
Windows 95.
I believe so.
95.
Okay.
Yeah, because one of the first things you did was go into the settings and figure out how to disable that guy.
He's my
And
best
now
friend.
ever since, I've just wished he was back.
Well, not if you read the book that Shannon and I read getting ready for this.
Well, yeah, guys, like I said, I think we're all utilizing the technology. We're all utilizing these open AI systems. Honestly, anymore, whether you like it or not, right? Because like I mentioned, we're using Microsoft products. Copilot is doing things automatically for it without me asking it to. Google is the same way. It's giving you AI generated Google search answers without you asking it to. So some of these systems we're definitely utilizing, whether we like them or not. I do want to steer towards the ag side of things just a little bit. And I know there's a lot of crossover here, guys, in what we're going to be talking about and some of the utilization of these things. But I guess I'm just going to throw out just a very broad sense of, what is the utilization today, I guess, from an agronomy perspective or an ag perspective. Scott, I'll let you start that one.
I guess I would say first and foremost, no matter what you're doing, there is a back office portion to any job that involves, record keeping and writing emails and writing documents and having to come up with a new way to present information or teach information and so those are the places that I see a lot of utility out of it, and I use it basically every day for some portion of that. Those aren't necessarily, um, we use Excel and PowerPoint and Word and Outlook and all those things every day for agronomy purposes, but so does the rest of the world for everything else they do. So I guess just for those office things that, there's definitely all of those. Specifically to agronomy, um, if the things that I would say we're already using and have been, for a couple years are, one of the most basic ones is simply taking a picture of a weed and seeing what it tells you it is.
Right.
Insects. We've got some apps that work pretty well on those. Those kind of things. Um, we can get into this more. Sometimes just um, if you're needing a place to start or like ideas, I may ask it. I'll tell you right now, I don't use search engines anymore. I've got a ChatGPT is probably the go-to, but I use Grok a lot. I'm using Copilot more and more every day. I rarely open up Google and do a search. Now, I'll use it for other things, and then like you said, I think earlier, a lot of times it steers you into an AI.
Right.
But I'm using it for those kind of things all the time, simply because it seems like it does a better job of understanding what I'm asking. I've forgotten them all. I used to know a lot of the tricks of doing a search and putting this word in quotes, and plus sign this, and if I just spit it out in AI and maybe have to fine tune it once, it usually gives me what I'm after. So using it for those kind of things to maybe get a start on maybe a question about an herbicide or something like that. And then going and doing the rest of it on my own, because if you start trusting it beyond that, I run into a lot of problems really fast when you get into details. So yeah, Shannon, what do you think?
Yeah, so along those lines, and one thing that's nice about AI versus like a chat GPT instead of being on a Google search, if you've already got a train of thought going with it and you're thinking about writing an article or typing up an email to send to a team, I sent out an agronomy alert last week because we were talking about planters starting to roll and their forecast didn't look favorable, and we had the potential for some cold injury. And I went in there, started asking some questions, and then asked for you know, a professional email that could be sent to the team that could relay tips to the producer when they're on the farm, and it shot out an email faster than I could have typed it and looked a lot better than what I could have typed. And it saved me, probably would have took probably an hour to two of researching all the information and then putting it into words that made sense to the team. So it's powerful. Some other things that we see, the drone world, it seems to it's taken off recently as well. There's things that it's computing stand counts, looking at even you using the NDVI. The NDVI is not the AI, but the tools that it's reading that data and making recommendations or decisions. In the background is AI doing that kind of stuff. We look at autonomy with the autonomy of tractors. As we go down that pipeline, there's AI tied to all that. From a seed breeding standpoint, the time that it took to go through Excel sheets to start narrowing down, lines, that's sped up tremendously just because AI can compute it faster than what a person can do.
Right. Right. So it seems like what you guys are telling me is that it's a pretty major time saver for you at this point. But it sounds like you guys have some questions about accuracy, and I assume that's because it is just reading anything that's openly available on the internet, right? And it takes anything that it reads as a fact and really can't disseminate what is actually printed on the current herbicide label versus something that's written in an article by somebody who just has a blog out on the internet. Is that right, Scott? Or what are some of the things like that you have taken from some of the information, I guess, that you've asked AI to generate for you?
Yeah, it will find faulty information, but sometimes it will also just go off on a tangent on its own that they'll call the name has kind of been that it hallucinates. And I thought that was a little more of like a skeptic term. But Shannon had recommended that I read I ended up listening to a book that was on AI, put out, I don't know, he's about 18 months ago, I think, when he wrote it. So not terrible, not a terrible long time ago. And really when I was first listening to it, the intro, I thought, well, heck, this guy's all in, and I've got these issues that I've noticed and all this, but once he got past the intro into kind of the meat and potatoes, he talked about a lot of these things, and he talked about the whole hallucination thing, and how even in some cases it seems like there's not a great understanding of why it does that. So I mean, I can give you, I don't want to get too in the weeds on like the examples, but just like things that I've ran into, because it does matter, because it will say things that are so convincing. Chemical labels, for example. I mean, I'm embarrassed to tell you how long I argued with Grok last night about a chemical label. With me finally basically saying to it, listen, the weed that you're saying can be controlled by this herbicide is not listed on the label in either the English or in the Latin. It is not on there. The label is the law, on and on and on. And I mean, it just kept like doubling down on one particular piece of research that, well, if you look at this thing in Kansas, it just, so I knew that I was familiar with the label, so I was able to call it out, and it still threw some ideas out that made me look at other labels for what I happen to be looking for. My concern is, I work with a younger team that has less experience, a lot of right out of school, and I want them to use these tools as well, but it will say things so convincing that you just really you've really got to discern, what it's telling you, and go on and do the research yourself. The best two examples I can think of that just kind of illustrate it. Long backstory to it, but Mexico has 3 elementary schools, and we were having a conversation, and now today, all of the schools in Mexico, they're all the Bulldogs. High school's the Bulldogs, middle school's Bulldogs, elementary school. But back when I was going to one of these elementary schools, we were our own thing. We had our own mascot, and we were having a conversation. Well, what were those other schools' mascots? You know how you get to talking about silly stuff. Well, let's ask Chat GPT. So we punch one in, and it comes up with a name. Oh, I didn't know they were the whatever it said they were, the Mustangs or something. I don't remember that. We asked the other one. It came up with something. Very just boom. I mean, quarter of a second. So we kind of went on from there. It took me about 10 seconds before me being me kicked in. I'm like, well, wait, let's ask it about the one we know because we went to school there. And it came up with total garbage, like made it up. And I asked it very specifically the elementary, 1980s, Mexico, Missouri, on and on and on. The one that I knew the answer already, it gave it incorrectly. So I asked it back and it came up with kind of a story. Now, my guess is that somewhere, maybe currently still a school today, there's a McMillan School or Eugene Field that had these mascots, and somehow it saw that and threw it at us. But it was so convincing. We were watching a game the other night, and my son and I were talking about something, and I asked, I think it was ChatGPT, what are current NHL teams that have not won a Stanley Cup? And it threw this list that immediately, like Florida Panthers are on there. They won it last year. And there was another team, I can't remember who it was, but they had won it. So that seems so basic to understand. But long
Right. If
story,
you can't nail down accuracy of professional sports teams, then it's going to struggle with, how to control between 6 and 8 inch water hemp in some random county in Kansas, right?
Right.
yes.
I mean, is that what you're seeing too, Shannon, on kind of the accuracy when you ask it things? I mean, I know you're using it to draft documents and stuff like that, but you're inputting, I assume in those cases, you're probably inputting a lot of the factual information, and it's just kind of building the sentence framework and the paragraph structure, right?
Right. Well, sometimes I can ask it, what does northern cornleaf blight look like in corn? And that's a topic that I'm familiar about. I can read through what it shoots out real fast and know. But to Scott's point,
Sure.
I mean, there's some things, just random things that it should be easy. Like it should be way easier to know who won the last 5 Stanley Cups than what's northern cornleaf blight. But I've definitely seen that, especially on these open forums like ChatGPT. I was at a conference last summer, and AI was a big topic. And there are large companies, partner companies of ours, that are working on more of a closed type AI. And so basically, what the difference is, so your open AI is literally everything that's out there. And so the only way the software, I don't know what we call it, software engine, whatever it is, the only way it knows things is basically whoever puts that information in there. So there is a way to take that and close that firewall and just fill it full of industry specific stuff. For instance, we could take all of our agronomy knowledge, throw it into the AI, and then whenever you ask it questions, it's only going to rely on that information that we put in there, which is also scary to me because anyone can put anything in anything and can quickly change how people learn and what people know, just because, well, that's how we learned, right? Kind of takes away some of that history, some of that experience we talked about that Scott mentioned earlier. It kind of starts taking some of that away, and you don't learn the hard experience, right? It's the feel of it. You just are basically getting what's being shot at you through a computer.
But right out of school, I mean, we had chemical labels. We had the big green book. It wasn't long after you could pull everything down off the internet. But right out of college, I was given an MFA agronomy guide that is basically charts and
Yep.
the information's laid out. I mean, to me, if you had that kind of information, and people that don't know this, I mean, it goes through a process every year where it's updated, and our, the chemical companies we work with, all, proof the information that they put in on their products, and we all obviously are looking at it all the time. And if we see something that needs to be changed, if you had a database that had that same kind of information, and what did you call it? Did you call it an internal AI or
It's like it's like a closed firewall is what it is. So
closed? Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's
If
just
you had
closed.
something like that, I mean, we're using that a little bit even internally, just through our Microsoft, the programs that we use. I mean, if I go to Copilot, and I did that this morning. I mean, I wanted one particular slide that I knew was in a presentation I made. I asked it, boom, it goes to all of the PowerPoints, and
Yep.
there's my choices of where it may be, and I go right to it, as opposed to going out into everything to find,
Yep.
the map I was looking for in this case. So I'm excited about it from that standpoint, Adam. I mean, I'm very excited about it, just as I'm talking to other people in the industry that are going this direction, to be able to have quick information that right now we're having to kind of thumb through or pull up. And I mean, for that kind of stuff, I feel very good about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
What about from the kind of either the spatial or photographic, I guess, accuracy? You know, you mentioned some of the apps that will ID weeds and things like that for you. What are you guys seeing? I know you're both utilizing it, and your teams are starting to utilize some of that stuff in the field. What are you guys seeing from an accuracy standpoint, on those systems?
Similar, always is accurate. The picture, some of the picture apps, you take a picture and it sometimes will give you the right one the first time. Other times it may give you a list of 10. You got to thumb through it and you got to know where you're at, because it may say, well, this is a weed. You look up where that weed's located, and it's, somewhere in Europe. It's not even native to where you're at. So it goes back to still knowing where you are and what is native in your area. The one that I've been most intrigued by, but has also been the most disappointed by, has been the stand counts, with the drones. Just seems like the 2 or 3 different times we've tried them over the last 5 years or so, we fly the drone, which the drone is much faster. I'm ready for the technology to get where it needs to be to give us an accurate stand count, but every time we go out there and ground truth it, it's not right. And so from being out and giving growers recommendations and being able to know that field, to me, it's just not there yet. Of course, Scott mentioned that book. One thing he mentions in that book too is the AI you use today will be the worst AI you use, because it's going to be better tomorrow, because it is constantly, improving, whether that be someone going in and improving it or it's self-improving. So I do think that's going to get there. But accuracy still in question there as well.
Right. Right. So yeah, and that kind of goes back to what you guys were talking about earlier, as far as just kind of feeding false information. So we're, even if it's in that situation, it's kind of collecting false information, and obviously leads to likely bad decisions based on that. So
But there's still utility to it, though. I mean, we've used them, and a lot of times we would ground truth it and we'd find out, okay, it's missing a percentage.
okay.
So then we extrapolate that out to the rest of the field, and it's still, a lot of times we're using it whenever we can't hardly even cover a field, like last spring. We can't hardly even walk out there, let alone get a good accurate count. So if we feel like it's missing 3,000 or whatever, we can kind of do that math,
Okay.
with its finished product. There are some things coming out that I'm hoping we're actually going to get the opportunity to play with a little bit yet this spring, that are supposed to even do a better job than what we've used internally for the last few years. And I think that's a combination not only of AI, but I mean, better cameras and just everything else that's feeding it information.
Right.
I guess where we've used it, I mean, it sounds a little bit trivial, but I mean, we spend a lot of time identifying weeds and identifying insects, and they've been very helpful on that. I guess maybe it's a good time to talk about garbage in, garbage out.
Sure.
That's always been a thing with computing in general, and definitely is a case with AI, which, when it's going out and looking at the entire internet, I don't think any of us would argue there's a lot of garbage there. But one of the things that, I spend time with my folks on is really teaching them how to take a good quality picture out in the field. Because the details really matter. So on broadleaves, it does a very good job on insects, particularly adult insects. Well, I'd say even in if you can get a really good picture of even some caterpillars, it'll start you in the right direction. It's tough on grass just because you're looking at, I think, such small differences. Um, but there again, you need to know enough to call it out, like Shannon said. Amariah and I were looking at something yesterday, a winter annual, couldn't put my thumb on, and it spit the wrong thing out several times. And finally, I mean, we went old school. She said, "Hang on a sec," ran over to her truck and pulled out Dr. Bradley's book that had a lot of the local stuff, and sure enough, there it was. So it gave us three wrong answers before we kind of went old school and found the right. Not a big deal. It was still helpful. Um, but if one of our new folks that just grabbed it and ran with it, they would have been wrong.
Yeah, that's the problem with
right.
wrong answer. You have to know the answer well enough to understand that what you're looking at is the wrong answer.
Well, and like Shannon said, you want to look. I mean, the process that I'll go through. For example, where I'll use it a lot, there's a lot of, you get into some oddball pasture weeds. Adam, I'm pretty sure I've sent some of those to you before. Dave Moore gets a lot of those pictures. Well, a lot of times now I'll take a picture of it with, picture this or one of the other apps.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever it kicks out to me then, though, or after that, then I go to Dr. Bradley's database to, the extension weed site is very good. It's local. It's got a pile of stuff on there, but it's Missouri stuff. And, you look it up there and compare it and make sure you're on the right track. You don't just take what it says and start prescribing an herbicide. Or at least I don't.
Yeah, no, and that's a good point. But so I guess I'm going to ask kind of a devil's advocate type question. I mean, how useful is something then, guys, that is giving that many wrong answers? Like, if I gave you that many wrong answers as an employee and you paid me to be your expert, you'd probably find somebody else to pay, right?
Yeah. Well, to Scott's point though, it gets you started in the right direction. If you're just completely blank and don't even know where to begin, it gives you a starting spot. I think we're also kind of being hard on, I don't know how often it actually is that wrong when we take those pictures. I mean, there's sometimes it just does oddball stuff, and that's what sticks out.
Sure.
There's obviously the efficiency part of it, and improving efficiency, making people more be able to do more tasks at once. It's huge. Things I think of that we could definitely use it. I think it'd be very accurate. Our scouting reports that we write. We're going through and we're putting in crop size, we're putting in growth stage, we're putting in the weeds, we're putting in all the information in the boxes that we have to fill, and then we have to go write a comment section, right? I mean, obviously we have to partner with an AI company or create our own app, but there's nothing that says we can't have an AI engine in there that takes all that information, puts it into words, and saves 10 minutes just commuting information that's already in the app. So
it just lets you dictate it as you're walking through the field.
Yep.
I mean, because it's and even have it, it doesn't seem like it'd be a heavy lift for it to ask you. You haven't, Shannon, you haven't said anything yet about weeds.
Yeah.
And then you address weeds. Like it knows the boxes that it needs to fill.
Yeah.
Oh.
So I'm going to ask you the question that every agronomy student in America is probably thinking right now, or everybody that's training to be a custom applicator or anything like that. So how many live people does this stuff replace in your all's opinion? I guess both currently and possibly in the future. Like, you kind of alluded to it, Shannon. The worst AI that you're going to use is what you pop open your phone and type in right this second. So, from a future perspective, how many fields can this thing scout without an individual actually being there? How many machines can this thing run without somebody actually being there? I'm interested in your all's thoughts. I know you guys have done some research on it, so I'm interested in your thoughts on this, because I feel like that's kind of in the background of everybody's thought process.
I think short term, I don't think it does. I don't think it replaces people in the field, and I don't think it ever will. What I think it'll do is maybe increase the number of acres a scout can look at. There may be fewer people, but they're going to be able to do the same thing at the same level of detail on a much wider scale. Is kind of how I see it. Someone has to feed that engine that information. There still has to be someone who knows
Right.
agronomy to be able to fact check that thing. Maybe you're not in the field, maybe you're in an office and that's what you're doing, but someone still has to be there. We talk about the accuracy. Someone still has to be there to ground truth it constantly. I don't foresee it. Scott, you may have a different opinion. I know it doesn't matter what industry you're in. AI is scary. It's a scary name or scary word to everyone because it's cheaper. It is a lot cheaper than a workforce. So, you have the financial side to look at it, but from an actual giving agronomy advice to a producer, knowing, the mishaps, knowing the area, I don't think you can replace that.
Yeah, see, you
Scott.
think it's scary because of that. I was a child of the '80s, so I mean, it was all Skynet and Terminator. You weren't worried about it just taking your job. The more I use it, though, I still feel like we're a little ways from that. Um, to me, it's a lot of times when we're hiring people, we're hiring from a pool of several, not 20.
Yeah.
So it's not like I don't see these masses that are going to be displaced because, I mean, the industry as a whole, I mean, we all talk internally. I talk to people, with other companies, and I mean, it's just we're all fighting over the same people a lot of times. So anything that lets us do more. I mean, what I have always from the scouting, side in particular, if this kind of thing coupled with a drone allows us to do more acres with the same person, kind of scale it up in that direction. I mean, to me, that's a win. I think if it lets somebody finish their work at 8 o'clock instead of 11 o'clock at night, I mean, that's a win. If you're not spending, with, you can spend a lot of time looking for an email. I'm already seeing the dividends of what we're doing with some of that. To safety first, obviously, but as this stuff does a better job of you being able to speak to it and have it pull something up or whatever. A lot of us spend a lot of time on the road that it sure would be nice to be able to redeem some of that. I'm already a lot of times articles and, we do weekly articles and write things for magazines and stuff. I'm already kind of dictating some of that stuff, just into my phone as I drive and ideas, but to have something that actually takes all that jumbled mess and puts it into something like a coherent, starting point, that would be great. So I guess the one thing that jumped out at me, and I don't know how far we're into this, but I guess one of the points that I guess I wanted to make, and y'all can agree, disagree, or whatever. Yeah, the book that we were reading, what was the name of that? If we want to give the guy a plug, Shannon. Because it was interesting. It was a
Co-intelligence.
Okay. And it really was a good primer and kind of covered a little bit of at a high level or kind of the 30,000 foot view, kind of some of the architecture behind it and how it teaches itself and some of that kind of stuff. So it was interesting. But he did mention how, the AI you're using will be the worst one you ever used. Okay. I agree with that. But he wrote this book 18 months ago. And in my opinion, it could have been written last week from some of the experiences that I'm having. And then at the end of the book, he spoke about some of the challenges and even some of the theories of, how it's not progressing as fast as it was, and how now it's more of like getting into more refinement instead of like these huge jumps. And in fact, I was asking Grok or ChatGPT or whatever. I asked this early this morning. I was following up on some of that, like, hey, what do you think? Which is weird because you talk to it like it's a person. So that's he talks about that in the book a little bit too, how that even gets a little weird sometimes. But I mean, it agreed. It was agreeing with what he had said, that it's more refinement now, and it's, as far as there being this next huge change. I mean, it could obviously happen next week, but it seems to me, and again, disagree. I've been using it for a little while now, and I'm not seeing any kind of huge crazy change. And I haven't said that. I'm not coding with it. I'm not really stretching it probably in a lot of cases. I consistently throw chemical stuff at it though, and I'm consistently disappointed in that. I'm not really seeing changes there. So, but the point of all that is not to end it with a negative. If you're waiting for like, oh, for it to really get good before you start using it, it could be that what we have is kind of what we're going to have for a little while to some degree until I think some of these, these firewalled databases, and some of that stuff. So jump into it, I guess is what I'm getting at. Be very discerning. If something seems, verify everything somewhere else. But I mean, as far as just idea generation and like just brainstorming and I've got to sit down with the team and explain this. I've already talked about it 10 different ways. What's another way to talk about? I mean, it is great for that stuff.
Yep. If you have a coaching session with an employee and you got an issue you need to work through and you don't even know how to attempt that conversation, you can give it the scenario and ask it for different tones on how to respond. And it basically, I've done role play with it for sales calls. I mean, did a practice 5-minute drill sales call with it, and I kind of set it up. I kind of set it up how we would do it, and I gave him a description of a farmer and kind of their demeanor and all the information, all those things that I wanted to discover in that call. So kind of had that information, and then just went through it and asked me questions. So instead of me having to get someone else or me make up the responses on the fly, they're shooting those responses back at me so I could talk with it. There's some things that I don't think what we talked about today is even scratching the surface of what it can do. It's just how we used it. And I think Scott mentioned, the old Google search. I mean, I'm the same way. I used to know how to be a master search in Google with parentheses and pluses and minus to get exactly what you're looking for. So kind of the same thing with the like Chat GPT and Grok. There's certain ways to ask it things to get what you're looking for. There's certain questions or certain things you need to say because it's not a person, but we want to talk to it like it's a person, right? But there are certain things, certain ways to phrase things to get more of what you're after too. I've just noticed that on emails. Like when I ask it to help me write an email or article, if I help set up the audience, it does a much better job giving me what I'm actually looking for.
I used it I used it a while back. I was kind of short on time and was putting together a presentation on nematodes. And, I mean, truth in everything I found, but was just jumping all over the place with like different ideas. And it was great. And it's keeping it in a way that you can go back and, okay, what was I asking 10 minutes ago? So it's been very helpful at that kind of stuff. I have not used it yet to generate any kind of like article or anything. I've used it to proofread them though. And I mean, usually my process is if I'm given enough time, I throw something out just to get it on paper that I can start editing. And then I come back to it, every couple days or whatever over a period. But then now I feed them all through, Chat GPT is what I've been using because I guess that's what I was using the most. And I mean, as far as just getting rid of the grammatical stuff and anything like that. But this is interesting. I wrote one recently on red crown rot for today's farmer, and I went through all that process. But then I bounced it out to a few of my folks just to make sure because I didn't trust it to understand all of the agronomy, and I wanted to make sure that there wasn't anything that sounded screwy that I'd said or anything like that. But then Taylor Nix up at our agronomist up at Boonville, Glasgow, Salisbury, I'd bounced it to her for that same reason, but she was also an ag ed person and did a lot of grading and proofing and all that kind of stuff. And she threw back probably 4 or 5 ways that it flowed better, that it read better, maybe got rid of half a sentence that was kind of redundant or, you know, whatever. The chat, and I used all of them or most of them, probably 4 out of 5, you know, 5 out of 6. The chat GPT had not caught at all. So that's made me kind of almost steer back a little bit from it. It was starting, I was using it to not proof me on a lot of things. You know, I've always had a couple go-tos that I would have double check stuff for me. And I was starting to use that, which I'm thinking I still want to still have that person, you know, look, because it doesn't catch everything. Um, but it catches enough to it's still part of the process, if that makes sense.
Still a useful tool, but it's still just a
Very,
tool.
very much so.
Right. You guys kind of
starting point for. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say you guys kind of beat me to this, but I was going to ask you, like, you know, from either, you know, from a grower perspective, right, or from an MFA employee perspective, what pieces of AI should we be using right now? I mean, like I said, I know you guys alluded to this a little bit, but sounds like you guys are kind of telling me some of the administrative stuff, you know, um, and also some plant ID or weed ID, those kind of things. But when you get to the actual recommendation making, just making sure you've got a human putting eyes on that. Is that what I'm hearing you guys say, or is there anything else that we've not talked about yet that you feel like folks like today? It's like, now you should be using this.
It will boldly be wrong. So just go into that knowing that for there's something about it, and that it, even when it's off, it will just sound so confident that you won't even doubt it unless you just know.
Like it's designed to give you an answer no matter what. It's not designed to say, I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah.
It's designed to give you an answer, and no matter what you put into it, it is going to give you an answer, right or wrong. It's going to give you an answer. Yep.
That's it.
I guess there is one thing. It won't help you with sports betting. I've tried that, and it says it can't help me with that. And
it will give
you know, I'd say if it would help with something like that, Shannon, somebody'd probably be smart enough to have that piece of it turned off, or at least turn it on for only a select bit of individuals. And I would imagine you wouldn't make the list.
Yeah,
so
probably not.
If you want to just play with it, if you're trying to figure out what the heck to do with it, one thing that is very interesting, or that I think very useful, and it's actually not to go down this rabbit hole of like copyright and all this kind of thing, but you know, a lot of us have, you know, we won't live long enough to read all the books we want to read. Ask it to summarize, you know, a nonfiction book you wanted to read, you know, some kind of, I mean, I recently, there was a business book everybody was kind of reading around the company, and I did order the book. I did read the book, but prior to reading the book, I went ahead and asked it to give me a summary. And then after reading the book, it was spot on.
Right.
You wouldn't have got it all by just reading the highlights, but you had a pretty good idea of what it was trying to convey by just kind of the bullet point, you know, the outline that it put together.
Yeah.
So
I think you guys are spot on. That there's a lot of utility there from really everything that you've mentioned. And I think there's a lot of fear that kind of gets into people's heads from the AI perspective. And I don't know if it's fear of the actual technology or fear of kind of what we discussed earlier about, you know, taking people's jobs and things like that. And you guys had some great points there, right? We're not facing a situation where we've got 45 people trying to get every entry level job that we have in the company. We're in the position that we're trying to find people who want to work and take entry level jobs within company. I don't think that's just us. It's the industry as a whole. It's certain geographies as a whole. It's not going to replace everybody in the ag industry. It's just going to make everybody who does work here more efficient. I think that's how we have to look at it. It's something that you should probably respect. I don't want to use the word fear, but just kind of respectfully doubt, I guess, is probably a good way to maybe put, you know, kind of the human interpretation on things. But yeah, I don't think it's something that we as an industry should be afraid of, or really anybody should be afraid of, unless you guys have something that I'm not thinking of. I just feel like it's it's going to be a long time before before society tolerates AI's ability to drive an oversized spreader down the highway, right? So when you think of it as like replacing a physical human doing that job, it's just not going to happen, and I don't think it's going to happen anytime very soon at all, to be completely honest. Now, if a human gets that machine to the field, can it be used in tandem to another machine that actually has a human operator in it? And that's where you're just like, oh yeah, I could totally see that, right? Because you've got human eyes watching that other machine work. You know what I mean? So, and it's away from a public roadway with somebody's family driving down the road in a minivan. So there's things like that I think it's just going to make us more efficient, but it's not something that we should be scared of, I guess, necessarily technology wise. You have anything to add to that, or anything that didn't sound right to you?
No, I agree completely. And we've talked a lot today about that, the application, how we use it in our day-to-day jobs and how it affects, directly what we do with the company. The innovation side, speeding up plant breedings, speeding up the process of crop protection, all the actual innovation that goes into, getting a product from start to finish, whether that be, a herbicide, an insecticide, a corn hybrid. It speeds up that process tremendously, and it helps us get what we need in the field faster. To me, that's exciting when we can take something that used to take 7 or 8 years to get through a pipeline and got it narrowed down to 3 or 4. That's huge. That's huge, and that moves the needle faster, and it gets us to where we need to be faster.
Yep, absolutely. Scott, any thoughts on that before I ask you one more kind of final question?
No, I just I think that at some level it's here, and I think for those of us in any business, we need to start playing with it and kind of seeing where it takes us, because it's something you're going to interact with whether you want to or not. I mean, we had those holdouts on phones and smartphones and all that, but I mean, eventually everybody kind of gets pulled into the latest technology.
Yeah.
I'll let you ask your question, but you were talking about the rig driving by itself and all that. Did you see what they did with the Tesla the other day, or at least maybe I just saw it the other day? It remember the old y'all may not be old enough. The old cartoons where the coyote would draw like a picture of a highway on the side of the mountain, so the
Yep.
the
Oh yeah.
road runner run into it. And anyways, they it was on, I think it was actually on Twitter, so that's kind of, or X, I guess that's ironic since it's got an AI now built into it. But and it's obviously, yeah, it's Tesla and all that. But they had a picture across the highway of a highway.
Oh, highway.
To see if it would detect that, hey, this is a screen up ahead that it needs to stop and not drive through. And boy, it hit it and kept on going. So obviously it was a thin sheet that it drove through with, didn't hurt anything. But yeah, if it'd been on the side of a barn or something, I assume it would have driven right through it too. So there's still things that we're not quite there yet.
Absolutely, absolutely. And your tolerance for inaccuracy on weed ID is like, if it gets half of them, right, it's pretty good. Your tolerance for inaccuracy on whether it detects a minivan with a 18-month-old in a car seat in it is very low, right? So it's just it's a completely different conversation. And I think that's where we've got to be smart and just place these things correctly. But so from your all's perspective. So from your all's perspective, I'll just kind of ask you this, and I'll let you kind of go around the horn one more time. And I know you guys are not software developers, you're not programmers, you're not coders. You guys are agronomists, but you've alluded to this a little bit. But look down the road just a little bit for me. And I know you guys have mentioned the slower development side of where you feel like we're at right now. But where are we headed? I guess within the next 5-10 years, from utilization of this? How is it going to make us more efficient? How is it going to make us better agronomists? Again, you guys have said some of these things already, but just kind of wrap that for me.
Yeah, I think just 30,000 foot view, just because it's hard to say, because we don't know at what rate this thing's going to change. It could be
Sure.
2 years, it could be 10 years. Some things seem to be slower, but when it comes to getting a new employee and taking them straight out of college and putting them in the field, I think they're going to have basically an agronomy assistant in their pocket that they're going to be able to have there with them. And as they learn, someone still has to do the communication to the producer or to whoever you're working with, right? Someone still has to have that physical tie to them. But in terms of the speed at which they could learn and get brought up to speed will be so much faster. Being able to, with ID, weed ID, with, plant disease, whatever it may be, the speed at which they can onboard will be so much faster. I do think we talk about these closed firewalls. I think those are going to become more popular. I think in our industry, I don't think it's out. There's so much agronomy, not just agronomy, but agriculture itself. There's so much research that's been done for many, many, many years with a lot of data out there. There's lots of data that could easily be thrown into something. And you do have a walking agronomist that, I'm sure someone will try to get a grower to download it, but, go back to Scott's point with the chemical labels, is that, are they going to be accurate? Because that information's already there, especially if you're looking online. It can see that it should be able to see the chemical label, and it shoots out wrong information. I don't know if we're ever going to get away from just shooting out wrong things at times. I see it helping efficiencies. I see giving people the ability to do more with less.
Mm-hmm. Agree 100%. Scott?
Yeah, as far as where it's going, I'm not sure. I keep coming back to this book that was written like a year and a half ago, which you would think would be a lifetime in AI, and you would think it would be out of date by the time it hit the press, the presses, and it wasn't. I mean, just listening to it yesterday, it could have been written last month, in my opinion. So I don't know if we're hitting, if we are slowing down, if we are, I mean, to me, that just, we have these tools now. I think we ought to be using them. I think we need to be playing with them. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, if you know that it's going to, it comes up with some really neat ideas, I guess is the best way I can. I was listening. I'll finish with this. I was listening to Joe Rogan was interviewing Magnus Carlsen, the chess grandmaster, kind of got in the news a little bit over some stuff a few years back, but interesting guy to listen to. But they got into the chess engines and AIs about 2/3 through the podcast, and when he was talking about traditional chess engines, which have been around like forever, he's like, they don't lose. If at its highest level, he said, I can't beat them.
Right.
And they play perfectly. And to me, that's the closed, firewalled, deal we're talking about. It's like all the rules are there, Well, then he compared that to what, and I don't understand even all the language, but I think was calling it a neural network that basically, to me, was more of like, I wouldn't have considered the former an AI. Or something that's going into a database. To me, that wasn't an AI, but the AI was the thing that's kind of what we're associating now that does it a little bit on its own.
Right.
Well, that's what he was saying with this neural network. He's like, we didn't, it wasn't taught how to play chess. It went out and figured out how to play chess on its own. But then it does like screwy stuff. So it will, you get a pawn to the other side of the table, and 99% of the time you're going to exchange it for a queen. You may exchange it for a knight because you want to make some kind of different move, for end game or something like that. But you're never going to exchange it for a bishop, because you get bishop moves when you exchange it for a queen. But he said that one will do that. It will throw like, and I forget what he said. It would almost make like he didn't say mistakes, but botch the move or whatever his term was. But even with that, he said it comes up with like all these very creative things that you never would have gotten from like the traditional chess engine that just plays perfect. And does that make sense at all?
No, 100%, 100%.
so
That's
it's like-
because there's a finite number of rules in chess, right?
Yes.
And we're trying to extrapolate this to agronomy. There's an inordinate number of rules there, and so yeah, no, it makes great sense, right? When you have a small enough data set like chess moves to go in and be able to human interpolate for it, this is what you do every time, right? And kind of tell it those things, it makes sense that it's going to do that every time. But when it tries to, just like you guys said earlier, it'll be wrong and just defend itself in being wrong. And the only way you know it's right is because you already know it, right? Because you're a human. So it makes a lot of
Well,
sense.
in that case, they were saying it would like when it was playing against an engine, the thought was it's doing that to kind of try to throw it off because that won't throw a human off. But then also, is it just doing it because who knows why it's doing it?
Yeah. No, that's
But
right.
if in the course of that, if you run another games through it or something, I guess there's just, even though it is not what I've always said, what I've always thought AI is supposed to be and what we were told it is going to be and all this kind of thing, there is still like huge utility in it.
Yeah.
And you just have to you just have to know what you're dealing with and truth it all. That book that we were talking about said, and this was almost, I hesitated to bring this up because it can sound a little bit, talking down to somebody, but said it's almost like an overeager, you know, assistant or intern that like just really wants to help and it's going to throw all these answers at you, and sometimes they're not going to be right.
Yeah.
But maybe the different way of looking at things, creativity, all that kind of stuff, still, makes it worth using.
Sure.
And so I don't know.
Absolutely. No, those are good thoughts, guys. Very good thoughts. Very, very much appreciate you guys doing some research on the topic and being able to bring a little bit perspective. Hopefully, everybody that's listening, we've made you think a little bit about how to use these tools in your day-to-day operation, whether that's on the farm or at the workplace. Trust but verify, right? And certainly not a replacement for humans, but think about ways how we can use these things to become more efficient. It doesn't seem like we've got a growing ag-based population. Doesn't seem like we have a growing ag-based workforce or knowledge base, right? I can tell you that agronomist brains like Scott Wilburn's do not grow on trees in today's workplace. And so we're going to have tools like this to just make us more efficient and possibly just make us feel, I guess, less stressed in the workplace. Like we don't need to be spread so thin, but can make us more efficient. So challenge you guys to all be thinking about that. Hopefully we've made you kind of think about ways to do that. And by all means, ask an AGI generator to summarize this podcast for you, even though I'm saying this at the end when you've already listened to it all. So anyway, with all of
It'll
that,
be
guys,
interesting to see how this one ages.
yeah, for sure. It will be. We'll have to come back and listen to this in a couple years. But thank you, Shannon, so much for your time. Thank you, Scott, so much for your time and thinking about this and taking the time to record with us today. And thanks to all of you all out there listening for taking the time to share the topic with us. And we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you for listening to Made for Agriculture, brought to you by MFA, your whole farm solution.